From the earliest years, many women are taught directly or subtly that their worth depends on how well they please others. Approval becomes the silent currency of belonging. A girl praised for being agreeable learns to soften her voice. A young woman applauded for her beauty learns to measure her value in glances. A partner admired for her sacrifices learns to suppress her own desires in order to keep peace. Over decades, this conditioning becomes so ingrained that it feels natural to mold one's choices around acceptance. But beneath the surface, the cost is immense, the quiet erosion of individuality. Breaking free from this pattern is not simply a behavioral shift. It is a psychological rupture. To stop seeking approval is to dismantle a structure built across generations. At first, it feels risky. Without external affirmation, there is silence. Without predictable praise, there is uncertainty. Yet within that silence and uncertainty lies the seed of liberation. Carl Jung described individuation as the journey toward wholeness, the process of living from one's authentic self rather than from the expectations projected by society or others. When a woman no longer bends to external approval, she begins this journey in earnest. The psychological impact is profound. Anxiety, once tied to others' opinions, begins to loosen its grip. Decisions are made with more clarity, not because they are guaranteed to please, but because they align with inner truth. Instead of asking, "Will they approve of me?" she begins to ask, "Does this honor me?" This subtle shift transforms the atmosphere of her life. She no longer lives under the constant weight of performance. She steps out of the endless audition and into her own stage. The applause may quiet, but the voice inside grows louder. Jung believed that liberation from the external gaze is a necessary step toward individuation. The gaze of others, family, society, even partners, functions like a mirror that can distort as easily as it can reflect. When a woman stops relying on this mirror, she begins to construct her identity from within. She discovers that peace does not come from being seen as perfect, but from knowing herself as whole, even with flaws. This kind of freedom is unsettling at first, but eventually it becomes the only ground solid enough to stand on. There are countless stories of mature women who discovered their true power in this rupture. One woman, after decades of shaping her life around her children and husband, decided to return to school at 50. The choice was not applauded at first, some even criticized it. Yet, in time, her confidence grew, and the respect she received came not from pleasing others, but from embodying her own truth. Another, after years of avoiding solitude for fear of being judged, began traveling alone. At first, whispers of disapproval followed her, but she returned with stories, wisdom, and a strength that silenced the need for anyone's permission. These women did not become less lovable by rejecting the constant search for approval. They became more authentic. Their presence shifted from being shaped by external acceptance to radiating internal conviction. Men, friends, even family members responded differently, not always with comfort, but always with recognition that something had changed. The woman was no longer playing the role assigned to her. She was living from her essence. To rupture with the conditioning of pleasing is to choose authenticity over applause. It is to step into a kind of solitude that is not lonely but liberating. And though at first the silence of missing approval feels strange, it becomes the space where a woman finally hears her own voice. That voice, once buried, becomes the source of her deepest peace. And it is this voice, not the echo of others' opinions, that guides her into the fullness of herself. When a woman no longer orbits around the approval of others, her independence can feel unsettling to certain men. What once seemed predictable, the woman who softens her edges to keep harmony, now stands firm in her own choices. For some, this clarity is read not as strength, but as rejection. It challenges the invisible contract that many men were conditioned to expect, that a woman's role is to affirm, to soothe, to adjust. When she no longer complies, they sense the loss of control, and with it, the fear of becoming irrelevant in the bond. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the part of the psyche that resists what threatens its illusions. In this dynamic, the feminine autonomy awakens the masculine shadow. Instead of celebrating her independence, some men experience it as an affront to their authority or desirability. They confuse her freedom with abandonment, her strength with defiance. Beneath the surface lies an unconscious fear. If she does not need his approval, does she still need him at all? This fear can lead to attempts to minimize her power, to reframe her choices as selfishness, or to demand concessions disguised as affection. Yet what is often missed is that respect is born precisely in the presence of firmness. The men who carry maturity recognize that a woman who refuses to diminish herself is not a threat, but a gift. Her independence does not exclude connection, it enriches it. By honoring her own essence, she invites a relationship built not on control, but on authenticity. Instead of shrinking to maintain peace, she models a different kind of peace, the kind that comes from standing rooted in herself. There are many situations where this becomes clear. A woman who sets a financial boundary may be accused of being difficult, yet the man who respects it shows his readiness for a partnership rather than dependency. A woman who insists on time alone may be called distant, but a partner who honors it proves he understands that intimacy grows when individuality is preserved. The very gestures that trigger insecurity in the immature become invitations to deeper respect in the mature. This paradox is what gives autonomy its quiet force. Men who are unprepared will see her independence as rejection, but men who are whole enough will see it as alignment. Jung's insight helps us understand why. What is feared in the shadow is precisely what holds the key to growth. By facing the discomfort of her autonomy, a man is forced to confront his own insecurity. He must decide whether to cling to outdated expectations or to rise into a partnership of equals. The truth is that autonomy is not a weapon, it is a mirror. It reflects back the level of maturity in the man before her. Those who fear it reveal their fragility. Those who respect it reveal their readiness. And in that reflection, the woman who no longer seeks approval discovers her greatest peace. She does not have to convince anyone of her value. She only has to live it. There is a particular kind of magnetism that appears when a woman no longer asks for permission to exist as she is. Emotional dependency, the constant need for affirmation, carries a heavy vibration that can exhaust even genuine affection. But authentic presence, born from self-knowledge, radiates an energy that commands attention without demanding it. Jung would describe this as the embodiment of the archetype, the inner image made visible. For the mature woman, that archetype is often the queen, whose very presence inspires reverence. She does not chase respect, she embodies it. The contrast is unmistakable. A woman who leans into approval-seeking may appear eager, but the eagerness often feels fragile, dependent on the response of others. Her energy asks, "Do you see me? Do you accept me?" But when a woman is rooted in her own clarity, her energy shifts. She does not perform. She simply is. And that presence draws admiration more powerfully than any plea for attention. Men sense the difference immediately. Instead of encountering a void to fill, they encounter a fullness to honor. This magnetism does not come from arrogance, but from wholeness. The queen archetype does not shout her worth. She carries it in how she moves, speaks, and chooses. She is deliberate with her yes, measured with her no, and consistent in her values. Such qualities are not about control, but about integrity. Jung reminds us that individuation requires living in alignment with the self rather than with external masks. When a woman embraces her authenticity, She unconsciously awakens the archetypal image of dignity in those around her. Respect follows naturally. Simple habits can anchor this aura of silent magnetism. Keeping commitments to herself, such as honoring her morning rituals or pursuing creative work, signals inner authority. Speaking less but with intention gives her words more weight. Maintaining posture and eye contact without defensiveness communicates presence rather than need. These micro-habits, though subtle, accumulate into an unmistakable field of confidence. They whisper, "I belong to myself." And that whisper is more alluring than any shout for validation. This presence also shifts the dynamics of attraction. Instead of drawing men who seek control or compliance, it attracts those who admire strength paired with openness. The queen archetype does not close herself off. She opens selectively. Her availability is not constant but intentional, and this very selectiveness heightens desire. It communicates that love, when offered, is a gift, not a guarantee. The psychological impact of embodying this presence is twofold. Internally, the woman feels lighter because she no longer performs to be seen. She becomes the source of her own affirmation. Externally, others treat her with more care because her self-respect sets the standard. Jung's insight here is timeless. What you embody unconsciously shapes how the world responds to you. A woman who no longer asks for approval radiates the truth that she is already enough, and that truth is magnetic. Ultimately, the magnetism of such a woman is not rooted in what she does for others, but in who she refuses to stop being for herself. And it is this quiet insistence on authenticity that draws admiration, desire, and respect more deeply than any request for validation ever could. When a woman stops asking for permission to exist as she is, the entire landscape of her relationships transforms. No longer defined by the silent bargain of pleasing in exchange for acceptance, she begins to live with a kind of authority that unsettles and attracts at the same time. Boundaries, spoken with clarity, act as mirrors, showing a man whether he is capable of meeting her with maturity or whether he still depends on her compliance to feel significant. This shift is often where fear arises, because many men have unconsciously built their sense of control on a woman's willingness to bend. When she refuses to bend, he is confronted not only with her strength, but with his own shadow, the part of him that resists change and clings to power. Boundaries are not only rules, they are revelations. A woman who says, "I will not accept being dismissed when I speak," or "I will not sacrifice my peace for constant conflict," is not simply making demands. She is offering a test of depth. A man's response reveals whether he values the relationship as a partnership of equals or as a stage for his dominance. The paradox is striking. The less she seeks his validation, the more he feels compelled to respect her. Her refusal to minimize herself becomes the very thing that elevates her presence in his eyes. Respect cannot be begged into existence. It is commanded through authenticity. Carl Jung's concept of individuation explains this paradox. Individuation is the process of integrating all parts of the self, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, into a coherent whole. When a woman lives from this wholeness, she no longer fragments herself to fit someone else's comfort. She is no longer half a person seeking completion and approval. She is entire. And when she stands in this integrity, she awakens something in others, the recognition that true intimacy is not about merging into sameness, but about meeting in fullness. For the man who can rise to meet her, this is magnetic. For the one who cannot, it feels threatening, because her authenticity exposes the fragility of his own. This is why boundaries are not about building walls, but about clarifying thresholds. They say, "You may enter, but only if you honor what is sacred here." They invite respect rather than distance. A man who values the connection will not be repelled by these thresholds. He will be drawn to them because they give the relationship shape and gravity. Without boundaries, relationships drift into resentment and imbalance. With them, they gain structure, like the banks of a river that give water direction. Consider practical situations where this plays out. A woman declines to sacrifice her personal rituals, morning walks, time with friends, creative pursuits, even when her partner pressures her to make herself constantly available. At first, he may protest, but if he is capable of maturity, he eventually recognizes that her independence enriches the relationship rather than diminishing it. Another woman refuses to tolerate dismissive humor at her expense during social gatherings. Instead of laughing along to keep peace, she calmly addresses it. "That's not acceptable to me." The immature man may grow defensive, but the mature one feels respect grow in the face of her firmness. These are not confrontations for the sake of conflict. They are moments where her refusal to seek approval elevates the standard of connection. The strategies that sustain this position without creating walls are subtle but powerful. She pauses before reacting, choosing words that express her truth without unnecessary aggression. She frames her limits in the language of self-care rather than accusation. "I need time to rest," instead of, "You never give me space." She maintains steady eye contact, signaling both openness and firmness. These gestures prevent her stance from hardening into hostility while still making clear that she will not diminish herself. Psychologically, this approach transforms the relationship dynamic. Instead of constantly negotiating for approval, the woman's presence itself sets the standard. The man learns quickly that respect is the price of admission, and if he cannot offer it, he will not remain. For many men, this is a challenge that awakens growth. They begin to see her not as someone to control, but as someone to revere. Jung's archetype of the queen embodies this truth. She does not beg for loyalty, she inspires it. Her presence demands it without words. Yet there is also risk in this transformation, and the woman must face it. Some men will leave, some will label her cold, distant, or difficult. But here lies the deeper freedom. Their departure is not a loss, it is a filter. The men who cannot meet her in respect were never truly capable of offering love that nourishes. Their absence creates space for those who can. This is why the refusal to seek approval is not only a personal victory, but a relational one. It clears away the illusions and leaves only what is real. In the end, the paradox becomes her power. The more she surrenders the hunger for approval, the more respect she naturally commands. The less she bends, the more space she creates for genuine intimacy. And the quieter she becomes in her authenticity, the louder her presence resonates. This is not about dominance, it is about equilibrium. A woman who no longer seeks to be validated teaches everyone around her that love is not about diminishing oneself, but about standing whole. The truth is simple. When she refuses to shrink, she redefines the relationship itself. She shows that love cannot be built on compliance, but only on mutual recognition. And in this redefinition lies her greatest gift, a partnership where peace and power coexist, where respect grows naturally, and where her essence is never compromised for the comfort of another. Freedom is never louder than in the life of a woman who no longer lives at the mercy of external validation. For years, the habit of seeking approval can shape every choice, how she dresses, how she speaks, even how she loves. But once she steps out of that cycle, she discovers a source of power that no one can give or take away. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming fully oneself, and this is precisely what unfolds when a woman realizes that her essence needs no audience. She is no longer performing, she is living. The relief of no longer chasing approval is profound. Where once there was anxiety, wondering if she had done enough, given enough, pleased enough, there is now calm. Silence no longer feels like rejection, but like rest. She moves through life lighter because her choices are guided by inner truth, not by the shifting tides of others' opinions. Her energy, once spent on maintaining masks, becomes available for creation, growth, and joy. This release is not only emotional but deeply spiritual. It is the return of her soul to its rightful place at the center of her life. From this freedom flows an unexpected magnetism. A woman who needs no constant affirmation carries an aura of confidence that draws respect without demanding it. She does not chase love, but love is drawn to her clarity. Men who fear autonomy may turn away, but those who recognize value are compelled to stay. The paradox becomes clear. The less she asks to be seen, the more visible she becomes. Her authenticity, no longer diluted, shines with a strength that captivates not by effort, but by presence. This transformation also changes how she relates to conflict and connection. Without the fear of losing approval, she can speak with honesty. She can say no without guilt, yes without hesitation, and walk away without regret when a bond no longer honors her essence. Instead of clinging to relationships that drain her, she filters them with ease. In doing so, she creates space only for connections that respect her wholeness. This discernment protects her peace more effectively than any external validation ever could. Stories of women who embody this freedom show its depth. One, after years of apologizing for her independence, chose to stop explaining her choices. Instead, she lived them. At first, friends and family resisted, but over time, they adjusted to her strength. Another, tired of being praised only when she gave beyond her limits, began setting boundaries without justification. The result was surprising. While some connections faded, those that remained grew stronger, built on respect rather than expectation. These women did not lose love. They found love in its truest form, love that honors instead of consumes. Jung would say that individuation is not about separation from others, but about integration of the self. A woman who no longer seeks approval integrates her desires, fears, and strengths into a whole that cannot be fragmented by external opinion. She becomes both softer and stronger, more open yet more discerning. Her life is no longer dictated by what others think she should be, but by what she knows she is. In this way, her freedom becomes a gift not only to herself, but to everyone who encounters her. The greatest truth is that peace and power are born in the same place, within. A woman who no longer needs permission to exist has already stepped into her highest form of love, the love of her own essence. From this place, she does not beg for respect, she emanates it. She does not fear solitude, she treasures it. And she does not fear age, because her magnetism is not tied to fleeting beauty, but to enduring authenticity. The woman who no longer seeks approval has already discovered the secret. Her freedom is her greatest magnetism. It is the light that cannot be dimmed, the voice that cannot be silenced, the presence that cannot be overlooked. And in living this truth, she finds what approval could never give, peace that endures and love that aligns with her soul.